The emergency room buzzed with its usual chaos when Sarah Mitchell was wheeled through the automatic doors. Blood soaked through her torn jeans, and her face was pale as paper. She gripped the stretcher rails so tightly her knuckles turned white, but not a single sound escaped her lips. The paramedics rushed alongside her, rattling off vitals and injury reports to anyone who would listen. 26-year-old female, motorcycle accident on Highway 9. Possible internal bleeding, definite compound fracture of the left leg, multiple lacerations. One paramedic called out as they transferred her to the hospital bed. Dr. Marcus Rivera, a former Navy SEAL turned emergency room physician, looked up from his chart. He had seen thousands of injured people in his military career and civilian practice, but something about this woman caught his attention. It wasn't just her injuries that stood out. It was the way she held herself. Even in obvious pain, she maintained a rigid posture, her eyes scanning the room with the alertness of someone always ready for danger. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" Marcus asked, pulling on his gloves as the nurses prepared the treatment area. "Sarah Mitchell," she replied through gritted teeth, her voice steady despite the pain. Marcus noticed how she answered quickly and clearly, the way soldiers were trained to respond during medical evaluations. Her eyes met his directly, no wavering, no tears. Most civilians in her condition would be crying or at least showing visible distress. Sarah looked like she was enduring a routine training exercise. "Can you tell me what happened?" Marcus asked while examining her leg wound. "Bike hit a pothole. Lost control," Sarah said simply. The explanation was brief, factual, and delivered without emotion. Marcus had heard similar reports from military personnel who had learned to compartmentalize trauma and stick to essential facts. He continued his examination, noting several old scars on her arms and shoulders that weren't from today's accident. Nurse Jennifer Walsh bustled around them, gathering supplies and monitoring Sarah's vital signs. Jennifer had worked in emergency medicine for 15 years and had developed a sixth sense about patients. Something felt different about this one. "Honey, we're going to need to cut away your pants to properly treat that leg injury," Jennifer said gently. Sarah's entire body tensed. "No," she said firmly. "Just roll them up. Sweetie, they're too damaged and bloody. We really need to remove them," Jennifer insisted. I said no. Sarah's voice carried a tone of absolute authority that made both Jennifer and Marcus pause. Marcus recognized that tone. It was the voice of someone accustomed to giving orders and having them followed without question. He had used that same voice countless times during his SEAL operations. "Ma'am, we understand your concern about modesty, but we need to properly assess your injuries," Marcus said, his own military training helping him match her direct communication style. Sarah studied his face for a moment, as if evaluating whether he could be trusted. Something in his demeanor seemed to reassure her slightly, but she still shook her head. "Fine. But everyone except the doctor leaves," she said. Marcus nodded to Jennifer, who looked confused but stepped back. The other medical staff also moved away, giving them privacy. Sarah slowly allowed Marcus to roll up her pant leg, revealing not just the fresh injury, but something that made Marcus's breath catch. Along her thigh, partially hidden by blood and fabric, was a tattoo that Marcus recognized immediately. It was the Special Operations Forces insignia, specifically the design used by female combat medics who had served in classified operations. Below it, in small script, were coordinates that Marcus knew referred to a location in Afghanistan where a particularly brutal battle had taken place 3 years earlier. Marcus had been there. He remembered that mission, remembered the chaos, remembered the medic who had saved 12 soldiers, including himself, when their convoy was ambushed. The medic who had worked for 6 straight hours under enemy fire, who had crawled through gunfire to reach wounded soldiers, who had refused evacuation until every injured person was stable. That medic had been listed only as M. Mitchell in the reports. Marcus had never seen her face clearly during the firefight, but he remembered her voice giving calm, clear medical instructions even as bullets flew around them. He remembered how she had stitched up his shoulder wound while explosions rocked the ground nearby. "You were at Kandahar," Marcus said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. Sarah's face went completely blank, the mask of someone trained to never confirm or deny classified information. But her eyes betrayed recognition. She had seen his face too, remembered treating his wounds during one of the longest nights of their military careers. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said automatically. Marcus understood the response. Even years later, even in a civilian hospital, some habits died hard. Some missions remained classified, some identities protected. "Of course not," Marcus replied, respecting her need for secrecy. "Let's focus on getting you patched up." But as he cleaned and treated her wounds, both of them were thinking about that night in Afghanistan. Marcus remembered how steady her hands had been as she worked on injured soldiers, how her calm voice had kept everyone focused when panic could have set in, how she had somehow managed to keep 12 critically wounded men alive until reinforcements arrived. Sarah was remembering the same night from her perspective. She recalled the SEAL with the shoulder wound who had insisted on helping carry other injured soldiers even after she had told him to rest. The one who had given her his body armor when hers was damaged by shrapnel. The one who had stayed awake all night helping her monitor the wounded even though he needed rest himself. "This is going to need surgery," Marcus said, examining her leg wound carefully. "The bone fragments need to be realigned, and there's some debris we need to remove." Sarah nodded calmly, the way she had accepted mission briefings years ago. "How long will I be down?" The question revealed her military thinking. Not how long will recovery take, but how long will I be down, the way a soldier asks about mission readiness. 6 to 8 weeks before you're fully mobile again, Marcus replied. He saw something flicker across her face, a brief moment of what might have been panic before her mask slipped back into place. For someone who had been trained for constant readiness, 8 weeks of limited mobility probably felt like a lifetime. "There's something else," Marcus said, reviewing her x-rays. "You've got some old injuries here that weren't properly treated. Looks like shrapnel fragments that were never removed, some bone damage that healed incorrectly." Sarah's jaw tightened. She knew exactly which injuries he was referring to. The ones from missions that never officially happened, treated in field hospitals that didn't keep permanent records, by medics who understood that some wounds couldn't appear on official medical files. "That's old news," she said dismissively. "It's affecting your current healing," Marcus explained. "Those old fragments are creating complications with a new injury. We should address them during surgery." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Dealing with the old injuries meant more extensive surgery, longer recovery time, and potentially more questions about how she had sustained those original wounds. "Do what you have to do," she finally said. Marcus began preparing her for surgery, but he could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes continuously scanned the room. He recognized the hypervigilance that many combat veterans carried with them long after their service ended. "Hey," he said softly, causing her to look at him directly. "You're safe here. How about your 6?" The military phrase seemed to relax her slightly. Having someone watch your 6 meant having someone guard your back, protect you from threats you couldn't see coming. It was a promise of safety that only someone who had been in combat could truly understand. As the anesthesia began to take effect, Sarah's carefully maintained composure started to slip. The drugs lowered her defenses, and for the first time since arriving at the hospital, she looked vulnerable. "The others," she mumbled as consciousness faded. "Did the others make it?" Marcus knew she was thinking about that night in Afghanistan, about the 12 soldiers she had worked so hard to save. He leaned close so she could hear him clearly. "They all made it," he told her truthfully. "Every single one. Because of you." Sarah's eyes closed with what might have been relief, and Marcus began the surgery that would address not just her current injuries, but the hidden wound she had carried for years. During the 3-hour operation, Marcus worked carefully to remove old shrapnel while repairing the new damage. Each piece of metal he extracted told a story of violence survived, of battles fought in places that didn't exist on official maps. He treated each wound with the respect due to someone who had served with such distinction. As Sarah recovered in the post-surgical ward, Marcus found himself thinking about the strange coincidence that had brought them together again. In the military, you learn to trust your team members with your life, but you rarely got the chance to repay that trust years later in such a different setting. Jennifer checked on Sarah as she began to wake up from anesthesia. The patient's first instinct was to assess her surroundings, her eyes quickly cataloging exits, potential threats, and available resources. Even groggy from surgery, her tactical awareness remained sharp. "How do you feel?" Jennifer asked, checking Sarah's vital signs. "Operational," Sarah replied automatically, then caught herself. Fine. I feel fine." Jennifer made a note in Sarah's chart, but she was beginning to understand that this patient was unlike any she had treated before. The way Sarah held herself, her unusual responses, her obvious comfort with pain, and medical procedures all suggested someone with extensive training and experience in high-stress situations. Marcus returned to check on Sarah's recovery, bringing her chart and a cup of coffee that had grown cold during surgery. "Surgery went well," he reported. "We got all the old fragments out, realigned the new fracture, and cleaned up the soft tissue damage. You're going to be dealing with some significant pain for the next few days." Sarah nodded, accepting the information without complaint. Pain was something she had learned to manage long ago. "When can I leave?" she asked. "At least 48 hours for observation. Then we'll see how you're healing," Marcus replied. "But, Sarah, you need to understand that this is going to be a long recovery process. Your body has been through significant trauma, both recent and old." The use of her first name caught Sarah's attention. In the military, first names were reserved for informal moments between trusted colleagues. It suggested a level of familiarity and respect that she hadn't expected from a civilian doctor. "I heal fast," she said simply. Marcus smiled slightly. He had said the exact same thing to medics during his own recovery from various injuries. The confidence of someone accustomed to pushing through physical limitations. "I'm sure you do," Marcus replied. "But this time you're going to heal properly. No field expedient solutions. No getting back to duty before you're ready." The military terminology wasn't accidental. Marcus was communicating in a language that Sarah would understand, showing her that he grasped not just her injuries, but her mindset. As evening approached and the emergency room quieted down, Marcus found himself stopping by Sarah's room more frequently than medical necessity required. There was something about having a fellow veteran under his care that felt like completing an old mission. Sarah noticed his attention, but didn't comment on it. She was accustomed to the bonds that formed between people who had shared dangerous experiences, even if those experiences had occurred years apart and in different contexts. Late that night, when Sarah thought she was alone, Marcus heard her talking quietly on her phone. Her voice carried the tone of someone making arrangements, handling logistics, ensuring that whatever responsibilities she carried in civilian life would be managed during her recovery. "No, I'll be fine," she was saying. "Just a minor accident. I'll be back to full duty in a few weeks." Marcus realized that even in civilian life, Sarah was still operating under military protocols, minimizing the extent of her injuries and refusing to acknowledge vulnerability. It was a mindset that had probably kept her alive during combat, but could complicate her recovery now. The next morning brought new challenges as Sarah attempted to handle basic tasks with her injured leg immobilized. Her frustration was evident, though she tried to hide it behind the same stoic expression she had maintained since arriving at the hospital. Marcus watched her struggle to reach a water glass and, finally, stepped in to help. "I could do it myself," Sarah said firmly. "I know you can," Marcus replied. "But you don't have to." It was a simple statement, but it carried deeper meaning. For someone who had been trained to be completely self-reliant, accepting help felt like admitting weakness. Marcus understood that feeling intimately from his own recovery experiences. The morning brought news that would test Sarah's resolve even further. The insurance investigator wanted to interview her about the motorcycle accident, and there were questions about her medical history that would require detailed answers. Sarah's expression darkened as she read through the paperwork. Official investigations meant official records, which could potentially compromise the carefully constructed civilian identity she had built since leaving the military. Marcus recognized the look of someone facing an impossible choice between getting proper medical care and maintaining operational security. It was a dilemma that many veterans faced when transitioning to civilian life, especially those who had served in classified capacities. The foundation had been laid for a story that would explore not just physical healing, but the complex process of learning to trust again, to accept help, and to reconcile a warrior's identity with civilian life. Both Sarah and Marcus were about to discover that some battles could only be won by fighting alongside someone who understood the true cost of service. The insurance investigator arrived at 8 in the morning, carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of someone who had seen every possible attempt at fraud. Sarah sat in her hospital bed, her back straight despite the pain, preparing for what felt like another kind of combat. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm David Chun from Apex Insurance. I need to ask you some questions about your accident," the investigator said, settling into the visitor's chair with his paperwork. Marcus happened to be passing by when he heard the conversation beginning. Something in Sarah's posture told him this wasn't going to be a routine interview. He paused outside her room, close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to respect her privacy. "Tell me about the moments leading up to the accident," Chun continued, his pen poised over his notepad. Sarah recounted the basic facts: riding her motorcycle home from work, hitting a pothole, losing control. Her answers were precise and factual, delivered in the clipped tone of someone giving a military debriefing. Chun frowned at his notes. "Your employment records show you work as a security consultant. Can you elaborate on what that involves?" Sarah's hands tightened slightly on her blanket. Security consultant was a deliberately vague job title that covered a multitude of activities, some of which couldn't be discussed in civilian settings. "Risk assessment, threat evaluation, personnel protection," she answered carefully. "I see. And this requires you to ride a motorcycle?" "Sometimes. Depends on the assignment." Chun made more notes, clearly unsatisfied with the brevity of her responses. "Ms. Mitchell, your medical records show several previous injuries. Broken ribs from 2 years ago, a dislocated shoulder from 18 months ago, multiple lacerations requiring stitches. For someone in security consulting, you seem to get injured quite frequently." Marcus saw Sarah's jaw clench. The investigator was essentially accusing her of being reckless or possibly fraudulent, not understanding that her injuries were likely the result of the kind of high-risk work that couldn't be openly discussed. "My job involves some physical risks," Sarah said evenly. "What kind of physical risks require someone to sustain shrapnel wounds?" The question hit like a landmine. Marcus saw Sarah go completely still, her face becoming an emotionless mask. Chun had clearly done his homework, finding references to her old military injuries in her medical file. "I don't know what you're referring to," Sarah replied automatically. Chun pulled out a medical report from her file. 3 years ago, you were treated at a private clinic for what was described as foreign object removal from torso and extremities. The objects were identified as metal fragments consistent with explosive debris. Marcus could see Sarah calculating her response, trying to find a way to explain classified injuries without compromising operational security. It was an impossible position. "I was involved in an industrial accident," she said finally. "What kind of industrial accident produces shrapnel consistent with military ordnance?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield. Marcus realized that Sarah was being cornered, forced to choose between getting her insurance claim approved and maintaining the secrecy that her former career demanded. "Mr. Chun," Marcus said, stepping into the room. "I'm Dr. Rivera, Ms. Mitchell's attending physician. Is there something I can help clarify?" Chun looked up from his notes. "Doctor, I'm trying to understand the pattern of injuries in Ms. Mitchell's medical history. Some of these seem unusual for someone in civilian security work." Marcus glanced at Sarah, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. She was asking him not to reveal what he knew about her military service. Mr. Chun, medical privacy laws prevent me from discussing specific details of any patient's history without their explicit consent, Marcus said professionally. What I can tell you is that Ms. Mitchell's current injuries are completely consistent with a motorcycle accident. But what about these previous injuries? The shrapnel, the pattern of trauma. Marcus chose his words carefully. Some people work in high-risk environments. Private security, industrial settings, even extreme sports can result in unusual injury patterns. Without more specific information about Ms. Mitchell's work history, it would be inappropriate for me to speculate. Chun seemed frustrated by the careful answers, but Marcus was protecting both Sarah's privacy and his own professional ethics. The investigator continued questioning for another 20 minutes, but made little progress against Sarah's training in operational security and Marcus's medical expertise. After Chun left, promising to continue his investigation, Sarah slumped back against her pillows. The stress of maintaining her cover story while dealing with pain and medication had clearly taken a toll. "Thank you," she said quietly to Marcus. "For what?" "For not throwing me under the bus. You could have told him about my service record." Marcus sat down in the chair Chun had vacated. "Your service record isn't his business. It's yours to share or not share as you choose." Sarah studied his face, tried to read his motivations. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I understand what it's like to carry secrets that other people wouldn't understand. And because 3 years ago, someone saved my life without asking for anything in return." The reference to Afghanistan hung between them, unspoken but understood. Sarah had never expected to see any of the soldiers she had treated during her deployment. The military machine was vast, and people were transferred, discharged, or reassigned constantly. Finding Marcus here felt like the universe completing a circle. "That was just doing my job," Sarah said. "No, it wasn't. Your job was to provide medical support. What you did was throw yourself into the line of fire over and over again to reach wounded soldiers. You saved 12 lives that night, and you almost died doing it." Sarah's carefully maintained emotional control wavered slightly. "I lost too. Rodriguez and Chin didn't make it to the evac chopper." Marcus was quiet for a moment, remembering the 2 soldiers who had died from their wounds despite Sarah's heroic efforts. "You kept them alive for 4 additional hours. That meant their families got to say goodbye via video call. Chin's daughter got to tell him she loved him. Rodriguez's mother got to sing him the lullaby she used to sing when he was little. You gave them that." Tears formed in Sarah's eyes for the first time since the accident. The memories she had tried so hard to compartmentalize were breaking through her defenses. "I should have done more," she whispered. "You did everything humanly possible, and then some." "I was there, Sarah. I saw what you did. You worked on those men until your hands were shaking from exhaustion and you could barely stand. You gave them every chance you could." The conversation was interrupted by Jennifer entering with medication and wound care supplies. She noticed the emotional tension in the room and gave Marcus a questioning look. "Everything okay here?" Jennifer asked gently. Sarah quickly wiped her eyes and reassembled her stoic expression. "Fine. Just discussing the treatment plan." Jennifer wasn't fooled, but she respected Sarah's need for privacy. She administered the pain medication and changed the surgical dressings with professional efficiency while noting how Marcus seemed to understand exactly what Sarah needed without being told. "Dr. Rivera," Jennifer said as she prepared to leave, "Sarah's physical therapy evaluation is scheduled for this afternoon." The therapist wanted to discuss her mobility goals. After Jennifer left, Marcus and Sarah sat in comfortable silence for several minutes. Both were processing the memories that had been stirred up by their reunion and the stress of the insurance investigation. "What's physical therapy going to be like?" Sarah asked eventually. "Challenging," Marcus replied honestly. "Your injuries were severe, and you've got additional complications from the old shrapnel damage. Full recovery is going to take months, not weeks." Sarah's expression darkened. "I can't be out of action for months. I have responsibilities." "What kind of responsibilities?" Sarah hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. "I run a small security firm. We provide protection for high-risk clients. If I'm not operational, people could get hurt. Marcus realized that Sarah had built her civilian career around the same skills she had used in the military. Only now she was applying them to private clients rather than military operations. How many people work for you? 12, Sarah replied. All veterans. All people who had trouble adjusting to civilian life after their service. The picture was becoming clearer. Sarah hadn't just transitioned to civilian life. She had created a way to help other veterans transition as well. Her security firm was probably as much a support network as it was a business. They're going to need leadership while you recover, Marcus observed. They need me, Sarah said firmly. These aren't people who do well without structure and clear direction. Some of them are dealing with PTSD, others have substance abuse issues, others just can't function in normal civilian jobs. Marcus understood. Sarah had essentially created a military unit in civilian clothing, providing the structure and purpose that many veterans struggled to find after leaving service. Who's your second in command? Tommy Reeves. Good soldier, but he doesn't have command experience. The team respects him, but leadership isn't his natural role. Maybe this is an opportunity for him to develop those skills. Sarah shook her head. You don't understand. 3 of our current contracts are high-threat situations. Corporate executives who've received death threats, a judge who's been targeted by organized crime, a family whose daughter testified against a drug cartel. These aren't assignments you can handle with provisional leadership. Marcus was beginning to grasp the scope of Sarah's dilemma. Her injuries weren't just affecting her personally. They were potentially compromising the safety of multiple clients who depended on her expertise. Have you considered bringing in temporary help? Another security professional who could handle operations while you recover. The kind of person who could handle our contracts isn't someone you find in the yellow pages, Sarah replied. And my clients trust me personally. They're not going to accept a stranger taking over their protection. The afternoon physical therapy session proved to be as challenging as Marcus had predicted. Sarah's therapist, a woman named Lisa Park who specialized in treating trauma patients, quickly realized she was dealing with someone who had an unusual relationship with pain and physical limitation. Most patients with your type of injury need encouragement to push through discomfort, Lisa observed as Sarah attempted to follow her mobility exercises. You seem to need encouragement to respect your limitations. Sarah was indeed trying to do too much too quickly, her military training pushing her to overcome obstacles through forcible rather than gradual progression. Pain is temporary, Sarah said through gritted teeth as she attempted an exercise that was clearly beyond her current capability. So is healing if you don't do it properly, Lisa replied firmly. MS. Mitchell, I need you to understand that pushing through significant pain right now isn't brave or strong. It's counterproductive and potentially damaging. Marcus watched the session from the doorway, recognizing the internal battles Sarah was fighting. Her identity was built around being physically capable and mentally tough. Accepting physical limitation felt like accepting defeat. Sarah, Marcus said gently, what would you tell one of your team members if they were trying to return to duty too quickly after an injury? Sarah paused in her exercise, considering the question. I'd tell them they were compromising the mission and putting the team at risk. And that true strength sometimes means knowing when to step back and recover properly. Lisa smiled slightly. Exactly. Your mission right now is healing. Everything else is secondary. That evening, Sarah received a phone call that would test her resolve to focus on recovery. Tommy Reeve called with an update on the firm's operations that sent chills through her. Sarah, we've got a problem, Tommy said without preamble. The Kowalski family situation has escalated. The threats are getting more specific, and the local police think there's going to be an attempt on the daughter's life before the trial next week. Sarah's mind immediately shifted into tactical mode, despite her physical limitations. What's the current security posture? We've got round-the-clock protection, but the family is scared. Mrs. Kowalski is asking specifically for you. She doesn't trust anyone else to keep her daughter safe. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like body armor. These weren't abstract concerns about business operations. These were real people whose lives depended on decisions she made from a hospital bed. Tommy, I need you to double the protection detail. Put Jenkins and Martinez on the family and have Rodriguez coordinate with local law enforcement. Make sure everyone understands this is a code red situation. Sarah, the team is good, but without you there to coordinate, some of them are starting to lose confidence. Peterson had a panic attack during his shift yesterday. Williams is talking about leaving because he can't handle the pressure without your leadership. The information hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her absence wasn't just affecting current operations. It was destabilizing the entire support structure she had built for her team of veteran employees. After the call ended, Sarah sat staring at the hospital room wall, feeling trapped between her body's need for healing and her team's need for leadership. Marcus found her there an hour later, clearly struggling with an impossible decision. "Bad news?" he asked, noting her expression. "My team is falling apart without me there to hold them together," Sarah said flatly. "And I have clients whose lives are literally at stake." Marcus sat down, recognizing the crisis of leadership that many military veterans faced when transitioning to civilian life. "Tell me about your team." Sarah described each of her 12 employees, their backgrounds, their struggles, and their dependence on the structure she provided. As the evening wore on, Sarah grappled with the most difficult command decision she had ever faced. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of medical monitors, each sound marking time that felt both precious and threatening to someone accustomed to being in control of every situation. The crisis call came at 3 in the morning. Sarah's phone buzzed insistently on the bedside table, cutting through the quiet hum of the hospital's night shift. She grabbed it immediately, her instincts still sharp despite the pain medication. "Sarah, we need you here now." Tommy's voice was strained with panic. "There's been an incident." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What kind of incident?" "Someone tried to grab the Kowalski girl. We stopped it, but Peterson froze up during the action. He couldn't move, couldn't respond. If Martinez hadn't been there." Tommy's voice trailed off, but Sarah understood the implications. "Is everyone safe?" "For now. But Peterson is having a complete breakdown. He keeps saying he failed you, that he's not cut out for this work. And Williams already turned in his gear. He quit tonight, said he can't handle the responsibility without you here to guide him." Sarah felt her carefully constructed world beginning to collapse. Peterson was a former Marine who had struggled with PTSD since his deployment in Syria. This job had been his lifeline, his way of feeling useful and capable again. Williams was a young Army veteran who had joined her team after being medically discharged for injuries sustained in an IED explosion. Both men needed structure and support to function effectively. "I'm coming in," Sarah said, starting to sit up despite the sharp pain in her leg. "Sarah, you can't," the doctor said. "The doctors don't understand what's at stake here." She was reaching for her clothes when Marcus appeared in the doorway. He had been making his late-night rounds when he heard her talking on the phone. One look at her face told him everything he needed to know. "Going somewhere?" he asked calmly. "My team needs me," Sarah replied, continuing to gather her things. "There's been a security incident, and my people are falling apart." Marcus moved closer, his voice gentle but firm. "Sarah, you can barely walk. How are you going to lead a security operation?" "I'll figure it out." "No, you won't. You'll collapse from pain and exhaustion, probably re-injure yourself, and then where will your team be?" Sarah stopped moving, her hands clutching her civilian clothes. Marcus could see the internal war playing out across her face, duty battling against physical reality. "They're counting on me," she said quietly. "I know, and that's exactly why you need to think strategically instead of reactively." Marcus sat down on the edge of her bed, his expression serious. "Sarah, I've been exactly where you are right now. After I left the SEALs, I went through my own transition period. I thought I had to carry every burden alone, that asking for help was a sign of weakness. This is different. These aren't just employees. They're veterans who have nowhere else to go. Which is exactly why you need to be smart about this. If you burn yourself out or permanently damage your ability to lead, what happens to them then? The question hit home. Sarah had built her entire post-military identity around being the rock that others could depend on. The idea that her determination might actually harm the people she was trying to protect was almost unbearable. What am I supposed to do? Let my team implode while I lie here recovering? Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking about his own experience transitioning from military to civilian leadership. What if there was another way to support them? What if you could provide leadership without physically being there? I tried that. It's not working. Because you're trying to lead from a distance using the same methods you'd use if you were physically present. But leadership in crisis requires adaptation. Sarah looked at him skeptically. What are you suggesting? Let me help you set up a crisis command center right here in your hospital room. Full communications, real-time monitoring, direct connection to your team in the field. The hospital won't allow that. I have some influence here. And there are precedents for setting up temporary command facilities for emergency situations. Sarah considered the proposal, her tactical mind evaluating the possibilities. Even if that worked, it doesn't solve the psychological problem. My people need to know I'm there with them. Do they? Or do they need to know you're there for them? There's a difference. The distinction was subtle but important. Sarah's team didn't necessarily need her physical presence as much as they needed her guidance, her decision-making ability, and her unwavering support. You really think this could work? Sarah asked. I think it's your best option for maintaining leadership while protecting your long-term ability to lead. By morning, Marcus had worked what seemed like a miracle. Using his connections within the hospital administration and calling in favors from his military network, he had arranged for Sarah's room to be equipped with secure communication equipment, multiple monitors, and direct phone lines to her team. Jennifer arrived for her morning shift to find Sarah's hospital room transformed into something resembling a military command center. Sarah sat in her bed, surrounded by laptops, tablets, and communication devices, coordinating her team's activities while Marcus monitored her vital signs and pain levels. This is highly irregular, Jennifer observed, though her tone carried more admiration than disapproval. Irregular circumstances require irregular solutions, Marcus replied, adjusting Sarah's medication to ensure she remained comfortable while maintaining mental clarity. Sarah was already deep in tactical planning with Tommy, using video conferencing to conduct a face-to-face briefing with her entire team. The difference in her demeanor was remarkable. Having a way to actively lead had restored much of her confidence and focus. Peterson, front and center, Sarah said in her laptop camera. On the screen, a young man with haunted eyes stepped forward. His hands were shaking slightly, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Ma'am, I'm sorry about last night. I froze up and stop, Sarah interrupted. Peterson, look at me. Really look at me. The young veteran focused on the camera, meeting Sarah's gaze through the digital connection. Do you see fear in my eyes? Sarah asked. No, ma'am. Do you see disappointment? No, ma'am. What do you see? Peterson studied her face through the video feed. Confidence. Determination. That's right. And why do you think I have confidence and determination right now? Because you believe in the mission. I believe in the team. I believe in you. One moment of paralysis doesn't erase 3 years of solid service. It makes you human. Marcus watched Sarah work with her team, recognizing the leadership style that had probably made her so effective in combat. She was simultaneously demanding and supportive, pushing people to be their best while providing the safety net they needed to take risks. Peterson, Sarah continued, I want you to talk to Dr. Martinez about what happened last night. Not as a failure, but as a learning experience. PTSD isn't something you just power through. It's something you manage like any other tactical consideration. The reference to Dr. Martinez surprised Marcus. He hadn't realized that Sarah's organization included mental health support. We have a psychologist on contract, Sarah explained during a break between briefings. Most of my team needs ongoing support for various issues. It's not enough to just give veterans jobs. You have to give them the tools to succeed in those jobs. The insight revealed another layer of Sarah's leadership philosophy. She understood that taking care of her people meant addressing their whole person, not just their professional skills. Throughout the morning, Sarah conducted individual video sessions with each team member, providing guidance, support, and tactical direction. Marcus observed how she adapted her communication style to each person's needs and emotional state. With Williams, the young veteran who had quit during the night, Sarah's approach was particularly nuanced. "Williams, I hear you're having second thoughts about this work," Sarah said when he appeared on screen, clearly reluctant to participate in the call. "Ma'am, I just don't think I'm cut out for this kind of responsibility," Williams replied, his voice heavy with defeat. "Tell me what responsibility means to you." Williams looked confused by the question. "Making sure nothing bad happens to the client. Being ready for anything. Is that how I trained you to think about responsibility?" "No, ma'am. You said responsibility was about doing your job to the best of your ability with the resources and support available." "Exactly. So when you say you can't handle the responsibility, what you're really saying is that you feel like you don't have adequate resources and support." Williams nodded slowly, beginning to understand Sarah's point. "What if I told you that feeling uncertain and needing guidance isn't a failure of responsibility? What if I told you that asking for help when you need it is actually the most responsible thing you can do?" The conversation continued for 20 minutes, with Sarah gradually rebuilding Williams' confidence by reframing his understanding of professional competence. By the end of the call, Williams had agreed to return to work with modified duties that would allow him to rebuild his skills gradually. Marcus was impressed by Sarah's psychological insight and her ability to motivate people even from a hospital bed. Her leadership style was a sophisticated blend of military discipline and emotional intelligence that he hadn't encountered often in his career. "Where did you learn to lead like that?" Marcus asked during her lunch break. "Trial and error mostly, and a lot of mistakes along the way." "What kind of mistakes?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. "Early in my military career, I thought leadership meant being tougher than everyone else, never showing weakness, never admitting uncertainty. It took me years to understand that real leadership meant helping other people be stronger, not just being strong myself." The insight revealed the personal growth that had shaped Sarah's approach to both military and civilian leadership. She had learned to lead with empathy without sacrificing effectiveness. The afternoon brought news that would test Sarah's remote leadership capabilities even further. The insurance investigator, Chun, had returned with additional questions and a forensic accountant who wanted to examine Sarah's business records. "Ms. Mitchell," Chun said, setting up his laptop in the hospital room despite the obvious security equipment, "we've discovered some irregularities in your company's financial records that raise questions about the nature of your business." Sarah's expression remained neutral, but Marcus could see the tension in her shoulders. "What kind of irregularities?" "Large cash payments from clients, overseas wire transfers, expenses that don't match typical security consulting operations." The accountant, a thin woman named Rebecca Torres, spread financial documents across the rolling table. "Ms. Mitchell, some of these payment patterns are consistent with money laundering or other illicit activities." Sarah felt her carefully constructed civilian life beginning to unravel. The legitimate but classified nature of some of her work meant that her financial records appeared suspicious to civilian investigators who didn't understand the security industry. "I can explain every transaction," Sarah said carefully. "Please do," Torres replied, pointing to a series of cash deposits. "These payments are all in amounts just below federal reporting requirements. That's a classic pattern for avoiding government scrutiny." Sarah realized she was walking into a minefield. Her clients included people who needed to maintain low profiles for legitimate reasons, but explaining that without compromising their privacy would be nearly impossible. "Some of my clients prefer discretion," Sarah said. "What kind of clients need that level of discretion?" Chun pressed. Marcus watched Sarah calculate her response, understanding that she was trying to protect both her clients and her business without revealing classified information about her background or her clients' identities. Corporate executives dealing with hostile takeover attempts, judges handling organized crime cases, families involved in high-profile legal proceedings, Sarah replied, sticking to information that was already part of public record. Torres wasn't satisfied. That doesn't explain the overseas transfers or the equipment purchases that appear to be military-grade surveillance gear. The investigation was moving into territory that Sarah couldn't discuss without potentially compromising ongoing security operations or revealing classified capabilities. I think this conversation needs to include my attorney, Sarah said firmly. Chun and Torres exchanged glances. From their perspective, Sarah's request for legal representation confirmed their suspicions that something improper was happening. After the investigators left, promising to return with additional documentation requests, Sarah slumped back in her hospital bed. The stress of managing her team, coordinating security operations, and defending her business practices was taking a visible toll. "This is getting complicated," Marcus observed. "It's about to get a lot more complicated," Sarah replied, checking her secure phone. "I just received word that one of my former military contacts needs a favor. Someone from the intelligence community wants to meet with me." Marcus felt a chill of concern. "What kind of favor?" "The kind I can't discuss, even with you." The implication was clear. Sarah's past was catching up with her present in ways that could potentially compromise everything she had built in civilian life. The careful balance between her public identity and her classified background was beginning to collapse. "Sarah, maybe it's time to consider whether trying to maintain your security clearance and run a civilian business is sustainable." Sarah looked at him with surprise. "You're suggesting I abandon the intelligence community?" "I'm suggesting you might need to choose between your past and your future. You can't serve two masters indefinitely." The observation forced Sarah to confront a decision she had been avoiding since leaving active duty. Her civilian security firm allowed her to use her military skills while helping other veterans, but it also required her to maintain connections to her classified past that could potentially compromise her present. As evening approached, Sarah received another call that would force her to make that choice sooner than expected. The voice on the other end belonged to someone she hadn't heard from in 2 years, someone whose call could only mean that her classified past was about to collide with her civilian present in ways that would change everything. The voice on the encrypted phone belonged to Colonel Rebecca Hayes, Sarah's former commanding officer, and someone who knew more about Sarah's classified service record than anyone else alive. "Mitchell, we need to talk. In person. Tonight." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Colonel Hayes didn't make casual contact, and she definitely didn't request face-to-face meetings unless something had gone seriously wrong in the intelligence world. "Ma'am, I'm currently hospitalized. I can't travel." "Then, I'm coming to you. Clear the room of all unauthorized personnel. This conversation is classified at the highest levels." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with growing dread. She looked at Marcus, who had been monitoring her vital signs during the call. "I need you to leave," she said quietly. "Sarah, you shouldn't be handling high-stress situations right now. Your blood pressure is already elevated, and, Marcus, this isn't medical advice I'm asking for. This is a direct order from someone with the authority to make it stick." Marcus recognized a shift in Sarah's demeanor. She had transformed from patient to soldier in a matter of seconds, her entire bearing changing to match the gravity of whatever was about to happen. "How long do you need?" he asked. "I don't know. Could be an hour, could be all night." Marcus nodded and began disconnecting the non-essential monitoring equipment. "I'll make sure the nursing staff knows not to disturb you unless there's a medical emergency." After Marcus left, Sarah spent 20 minutes securing her room and establishing proper protocols for a classified briefing. Despite being in a civilian hospital, her military training kicked in automatically when faced with official contact from her former chain of command. Colonel Hayes arrived precisely at 9 p.m., accompanied by a man in a dark suit who looked like every intelligence operative Sarah had ever worked with. They conducted a brief security sweep of the room before Hayes finally spoke. "Mitchell, we have a problem." 3 of your former assets have been compromised. Someone is systematically targeting people you worked with during your classified assignments. Sarah's blood ran cold. During her military service, she had recruited and managed human intelligence assets in some of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan and Pakistan. These were local nationals who had risked their lives to provide information to U.S. forces. Who's been compromised? Sarah asked. Ahmad Kauri in Kabul, Maria Santos in Colombia, and Dr. Yuki Tanaka in Tokyo. All 3 were found dead within the past 2 weeks. All 3 showed signs of professional interrogation before they were killed. The names hit Sarah like physical blows. These weren't just intelligence assets. They were people she had personally recruited, trained, and protected during her active service. She had promised each of them that their cooperation would remain secret, that they would be safe. Someone's working through your contact list systematically. Hayes continued. We believe they're trying to piece together your operational history to identify current classified programs. What does this have to do with me now? I've been out of active service for 3 years. The man in the suit spoke for the first time. Ms. Mitchell, your current business has attracted attention from hostile intelligence services. They believe you're still operating in an intelligence capacity under civilian cover. Sarah realized the full scope of her predicament. Her legitimate security consulting business had been misinterpreted by foreign intelligence agencies as a front for continued covert operations. They think I'm still active, she said. Worse, Hayes replied. They think you're running a private intelligence network using your veteran employees as operatives. Your business model looks exactly like a cover for covert operations. The pieces of Sarah's current crisis suddenly fell into place. The insurance investigation, the financial scrutiny, even some of the more aggressive threats against her clients all made sense if foreign agents were trying to disrupt what they believed was an active intelligence operation. Ma'am, what are you asking me to do? Colonel Hayes exchanged a glance with her companion before answering. We need you to help us identify which of your remaining assets are at risk, and we need you to consider returning to active duty to help resolve this situation. I can't return to active duty. I have responsibilities here, people who depend on me. Mitchell, 12 more people on your contact list are in immediate danger. These include the interpreter who saved your entire unit during the Kandahar operation, the Pakistani colonel who provided intelligence on Taliban supply routes, and the Afghan police chief who helped coordinate joint operations in Helmand province. Each name Hayes mentioned brought back vivid memories of dangerous missions and life-or-death situations where these individuals had risked everything to help American forces. Sarah had made personal promises to each of them about their safety and their value to the United States. How long would active duty assignment be? Sarah asked. Minimum 6 months, possibly longer. You'd be working directly with CIA and NSA to identify the hostile network and neutralize the threat to your former assets. Sarah felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on her. Returning to active duty would mean abandoning her civilian team when they needed her most, potentially destroying the business she had built to help other veterans. But refusing could mean the deaths of people who had trusted her with their lives. I need time to think about this. You have 24 hours, Hayes said. After that, we'll have to assume that your continued civilian status represents a security risk, and we'll take appropriate measures to protect classified operations. The threat was clear. If Sarah didn't voluntarily return to active duty, she would likely be forced to cease all security consulting activities and possibly face charges related to compromising classified information. After Hayes and her companion left, Sarah sat alone in the darkened hospital room, feeling more isolated than she had since her first days in military service. The carefully constructed life she had built since leaving the Army was collapsing around her. Marcus returned an hour later to find Sarah staring out the window, her equipment and monitors powered down. How did it go? He asked gently. Sarah was quiet for a long moment before answering. They want me to return to active duty. People I worked with overseas are being killed, and they think it's connected to my current business. Marcus sat down heavily in the visitor's chair. What are you going to do? I don't know. If I go back to active duty, my civilian team falls apart and my business dies. If I don't go back, more people die, and the government probably shuts down my business anyway. Have you considered a third option? Sarah looked at him questioningly. What if you could find a way to protect your former assets without abandoning your current responsibilities? The military doesn't usually offer part-time classified assignments. No, but they sometimes offer consulting contracts to specialists with unique expertise. Marcus had an idea forming based on his own experience transitioning between military and civilian roles. Sarah, what if you could negotiate a civilian consulting agreement that let you help with the intelligence problem while maintaining your business? The government doesn't usually make those kinds of deals with people they consider security risks. They might if you had someone to vouch for you, someone with the right credentials and connections. Sarah studied Marcus's face, beginning to understand what he was suggesting. You still have active security clearances. I maintain a reserve commission and consulting relationships with several defense contractors. If you were working under my supervision on a legitimate government contract, the possibility opened up options that Sarah hadn't considered. Instead of choosing between her past and her present, she might be able to find a way to honor both sets of obligations. Marcus, why would you do that for me? Because 3 years ago, you saved my life without asking what it would cost you. And because I understand what it means to try to build something meaningful after military service. They spent the next 3 hours developing a proposal that could potentially satisfy both the intelligence community's needs and Sarah's civilian obligations. Marcus would establish a defense consulting firm that could provide classified services, while Sarah maintained operational control of her security business. The plan was complex and would require careful negotiation, but it offered a path forward that didn't require Sarah to abandon the people who depended on her. The next morning brought a test of Sarah's remote leadership capabilities that would either validate her approach or prove that some problems required physical presence to solve. Tommy called with news that the Kowalski family situation had reached a crisis point. The trial was beginning in 2 days, and intelligence suggested that the assassination attempt would happen during transport to the courthouse. Sarah, we need to completely redesign the security plan, Tommy said during their morning video briefing. The threats are too specific, too well-informed. Someone on the inside is feeding information to the people making the threats. Sarah felt her tactical mind engaging fully despite her physical limitations. Show me the current plan. Tommy shared his screen, displaying a detailed map of the route from the Kowalski family's safe house to the courthouse. Sarah studied it carefully, her experience in protecting high-value targets in hostile environments coming into focus. The plan is too predictable, Sarah observed. You're thinking like security guards instead of thinking like warriors. Tommy, I need you to completely scrap this approach. For the next 2 hours, Sarah redesigned the entire protection strategy, drawing on lessons learned from protecting military commanders in Iraq and Afghanistan. Instead of a straightforward transport plan, she developed a complex deception operation involving multiple vehicles, decoy routes, and coordinated timing. Sarah, this is going to require coordination with local law enforcement and federal agencies, Tommy pointed out. Then coordinate. Use my name and credentials. And Tommy, yes, ma'am. If anyone questions your authority to make these arrangements, transfer them to me directly. I'll handle any pushback from officials who think they know better than we do. The operation Sarah designed from her hospital bed was more sophisticated than anything her team had previously attempted. It required split-second timing, multiple backup plans, and seamless communication between civilian and law enforcement personnel. Marcus watched Sarah coordinate the operation with growing amazement. Despite being immobilized by injury, she was demonstrating leadership capabilities that rivaled anything he had seen during his own military service. You realize you're running a major security operation from a hospital bed, Marcus observed. Leadership isn't about where you are physically, Sarah replied without taking her eyes off the multiple screens displaying real-time information from her team. It's about making sure the right decisions get made by the right people at the right time. The test of that philosophy came when Peterson experienced another panic attack during the final preparation phase. Instead of trying to manage the crisis remotely, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone. Tommy, bring Peterson here. Now. Sarah, the operation launches in 6 hours. We don't have time not to address this. Peterson is a key part of this operation. If he's not mentally ready, the entire plan could fail. 30 minutes later, Peterson sat in Sarah's hospital room, his hands shaking and his face pale with anxiety. Peterson, look at me, Sarah said firmly. The young veteran focused on her face, his breathing rapid and shallow. Tell me what you're afraid of. I'm afraid I'll freeze up again. I'm afraid someone will get hurt because I can't do my job. Peterson, 3 years ago, I was lying in a field hospital in Afghanistan with shrapnel in my chest and a concussion. I had to coordinate medical evacuation for 12 wounded soldiers while I could barely think straight. Peterson listened intently, his breathing beginning to slow. Do you know how I got through it? No, ma'am. I focused on one decision at a time. Not the entire mission, not all the possible things that could go wrong, just the next single decision I needed to make. Sarah spent 20 minutes with Peterson, using techniques she had learned from military psychologists to help him manage his anxiety. By the time he left, his confidence had been restored and his focus was clear. The Kowalski protection operation launched at 2 p.m. with Sarah monitoring every aspect from her hospital command center. She watched through multiple camera feeds as her team executed the complex plan with precision that impressed even the federal agents involved. The operation was a complete success. The attempted assassination was thwarted, the family reached the courthouse safely, and the testimony proceeded without incident. More importantly for Sarah, her team had performed flawlessly under pressure, proving that her remote leadership model could work even in the most challenging circumstances. That evening, as Sarah was reviewing the after-action reports from the successful operation, Colonel Hayes called again. Mitchell, I've been monitoring your activities. That operation today was impressive. Thank you, ma'am. I've also received a proposal from Dr. Rivera regarding a consulting arrangement. It's creative. Sarah felt her heart racing. What do you think of it? I think it might work. You'd be operating under strict oversight, and there would be significant limitations on your activities, but it would allow you to address the intelligence situation without abandoning your civilian responsibilities. The relief Sarah felt was almost overwhelming. The possibility of finding a solution that honored all her obligations had seemed impossible just hours earlier. There's one condition, Hayes continued. What condition? You have to prove that you can handle classified responsibilities while maintaining your civilian business. This Kowalski operation was a good start, but we need to see sustained performance over time. Sarah understood. She was being given a chance to prove that her hybrid approach to leadership could work, but it would require maintaining the highest standards in both her civilian and classified activities. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the parking lot of her security firm's new headquarters, her leg fully healed and her business stronger than ever. The consulting arrangement with the intelligence community had provided additional resources and credibility that had helped her expand her services to more clients and hire additional veteran employees. Marcus approached from across the parking lot, wearing civilian clothes, but carrying himself with the bearing of someone comfortable in both military and civilian environments. How does it feel to be back on your feet? He asked. Different than I expected, Sarah replied honestly. I thought getting back to full physical capability would solve all my problems, but the real challenge was learning that leadership doesn't always require being physically present. And how's that working out? Sarah gestured toward the building behind them, where her team was conducting training exercises for new employees. Better than I imagined. My people are more confident now because they know they can handle difficult situations even when I'm not there to hold their hands. Marcus smiled. Sounds like you discovered that real leadership means helping other people become leaders themselves. Something like that. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, both reflecting on the journey that had brought them from a chance reunion in an emergency room to a partnership that honored both their military service and their civilian ambitions. "Marcus," Sarah said eventually. "Yes. Thank you. For everything. For protecting my secrets, for helping me find a way forward, for believing I could make it work. Thank you for reminding me that some missions never really end, they just evolve into something different." Sarah looked at her building again, seeing not just a successful business, but a community of veterans who had found purpose and belonging after military service. The room that had gone silent when her combat past was uncovered had become the foundation for something larger and more meaningful than she had ever imagined possible. Inside the building, her team was preparing for their next mission, confident in their abilities and secure in the knowledge that their leader would always have their backs, whether she was physically present or not. The silence that had once represented secrets and isolation had been transformed into the quiet confidence of people who knew they belonged somewhere and had something valuable to contribute to the world. Sarah's injury had forced her to discover that true leadership wasn't about being invincible or always present. It was about building something strong enough to continue growing even when the leader wasn't there to directly control every detail. Her combat past had given her the skills to build that kind of organization, but her willingness to be vulnerable and accept help had made it possible to sustain it. The story that began with silence and secrecy had evolved into one of openness and shared purpose, proving that sometimes the most important battles are the ones fought not with weapons, but with trust, understanding, and the courage to let others carry part of the load.